I added some more stuff to help you guys out. Found some new articles that when I did this assignment a year ago, I guess they weren't out at the time, or I just hadn't found them. I actually added a few things. The first thing, there's an article here that discusses shot lists, and I actually added a table down below that gives you some things to kind of work off of, that kind of helps you out a little bit. For us, I'm not going to hit the shot list with every bit of detail, because sometimes they want to know like the millimeter of lens and everything. For us, it's just a matter of keeping us organized so that you're thinking out your shots before you go, so you can have really basic lists. We're going to start with that. But before I show you the new template that I like, that I'm going to personally work from, you can use whatever template you want. I know when I was talking to Dayton on Tuesday, because he came in for class, he already had one that he had found, and it was perfectly fine. A real basic one's great for this. I'm going to cover this other template and show you, there's more stuff than you need ever for this class, but it's a really great one. And then I added another StudioBinder article that discusses composition a little further. So far what we've done, what we discussed, just as a quick reminder, I wonder if I have this just on my desktop. Doesn't look very good. Well, can't read it, but when we're talking about our shot size, this was the first thing that we were kind of hitting upon last week that I wanted you to start thinking about. Starting wide, working our way into emotion, into that close-up. How does that transition? How do you go from shot to shot? And then the video I'm going to show you next talks a little bit more about how you frame up a shot. But I want you that to, as much as anything, give you some inspiration for some ideas if you haven't started shooting yet. So that really low res graphic is also in your assignment. And then there's a bunch of free shot lists here that you can pick from, but the one I'm going to go over is a Google Slides link, I think, something like that, that I found that I really like. And then for some of you who like to do a little deeper reading, their articles with StudioBinder are also just equally as great.
Films are made up of sequences. Sequences are made up of scenes. And scenes are made up of shots. In previous episodes, we covered frame rates, camera movement, and editing techniques. Today, we'll look at the elements within the shot that make up its composition.
So these are the things that we're gonna, that I want to kind of hopefully inspire you a little bit, not just to frame everything up dead center, but to be thinking a little bit on how your shot is set up. And this is why I think everyone should take the photography class, because this is a huge discussion in photography. And occasionally we'll do a photography assignment here and there throughout the program, depending on the scenario. But look at how these lines, just with whatever these shelves are, where he's getting ready to go train, box, whatever in this boxing film, and how they just keep it from being visually boring. This is so much more interesting that you can follow through the scene. It's just set up so nicely. And this is the kind of stuff that I'm not gonna be like, why didn't you do that, or great job on this. That's not necessarily where we're at, but start thinking visually like this. You're starting to tell stories with your imagery. So you don't want to be, it's okay at documentary, you're just capturing story, and we'll do an assignment that's more about that. But if you can really control your environment, and you have your actor and you have your set, think about how you can visually set up that shot to be a little more inspiring. So this is why I love this video. It has so many great examples.
This is episode 11 of The Shot List. Composition. We've got more episodes of this series coming soon. Get subscribed and enable notifications so you don't miss out. At the end of the video, we'll show you how to download our free ebook on composition elements. Now, let's begin. Simply put, composition is the arrangement of elements in an image. It is not only what you include in a frame, it's the relationship between those elements that creates the overall meaning.
So when we were talking last week, we were talking about this would be a wide shot, right? You got a whole lot going on in there. But also what I want you to start thinking about, if we're framing up shots and we're telling a story, then how are you, like what is in relation here? So in this case, your protagonist is, miniature compared to this godlike bad guy. And so how does that relation what is that telling you in your story? Things for you to start thinking about from here on out, because you are telling stories. And so whether we're talking movement on the next assignment or whatever, what's in that frame and what is it in relation to whatever it's going up against with that desire? Visually, how are you conveying that to your audience?
This concept began long before motion pictures, when images needed to tell a complete story in a single frame. Consider how much storytelling can be done in one image. We have characters, a situation, a power dynamic, a sense of drama, theme, movement. Composition also relies on aspect ratio, the size and shape of the image itself. In fine art, portraits are more naturally composed vertically, while landscapes benefit some horizontal compositions. Likewise in film, while the basic elements of composition always apply, there are different considerations between a squarish frame and a rectangular frame. Understanding these elements is key to understanding composition. And now, our first element, points. Composition is all about directing the viewer's eye, and points in an image are immensely effective in this regard. Focal points, whether they be points of intersection or just a small dot, can be used to draw an eye's attention. Where does your eye go in this shot from road to perdition? Notice how the composition draws our eyes to the focal point. Using points to direct attention is a popular technique in wide shots. Filmmakers will often use an uncluttered canvas so that naturally our eye goes to the point. But points aren't relegated to wides. Here, our eye is directed to the point of a sword. Points are often used in conjunction with the rule of thirds. The rule...
So before he jumps into the rule of thirds, when they're talking about those points, they're saying this is where they want you to look. They want this eye to go here for whatever reason. And so some of these examples do this by not having a lot of distraction in the scene. I know that this is obviously on a shoestring budget type student film project, but be thinking about what's in your frame. So if you are going to go wide shot, and you decide that when you're making your shot list because that's how you want to convey it, is this a big empty field or is it a cluttered street? What is in that frame? Because this is going to keep us from being distracted. We really don't have anything else to look at. Your eye might travel slightly, but you're going to go right back to the snowmobile. So points, where is your audience looking? Don't make it difficult for your audience to, because you have to remember they're naive. They don't know your story. So make it easy for them to comprehend what's happening. And then of course we got our leading lines. And something that they'll go in more detail in, and you can see with the sword, we've already covered some of this when we were talking about focus and shifting that focus and where is the eye, low depth of field. So in this case, the mountains, you can see them, but they're pretty soft focus, whether that's from the haze of the atmosphere and the color grading, or if the lens is just on a shallower depth of field because our focal point's here. All of those are to take in consideration, but what's in focus and what's in frame is going to be really important for you going forward. Think about these things a lot.
Points, huh?
Another example, we have our character center framed. There is elements in the frame, but they're not in great clarity. They're not real sharp. They're not in focus. They're not There's a mist or a haze or a fog. So we really centralize ourselves. Nothing's moving. It's not like a windy scenario. There's no creatures moving through it. It is just this guy.
Aren't relegated to one
Just basically paddling through the river. Your eye is going to naturally go there. So it's visually more appealing. In this case,
There,
the focus.
our eye is directed to the point of a sword. Points are often used in conjunction.
Same thing with this shot too. There is elements, there's things going on, but for the most part, that helicopter's really the only thing moving. It's the only thing that's where your eye is gonna naturally take you. Any thoughts or questions about that? No? And please feel free to, if you wanna look at an example again or whatever, I want this to hopefully help inspire you guys as you put together these simple little stories.
Conjunction with the rule of thirds. The rule states that the subject of a frame should be placed at one of the four intersections of the vertical and horizontal thirds of a shot. Another compositional technique that uses points is the golden triangle.
They're going to cover, I'm not going to quiz you on this, rule of thirds, golden triangle, these aspect ratios. This is really to kind of just throw this at you, give you some inspiration. But it is, these are subjects that come up regularly when you're producing content in a visual manner. So it's good to start getting these kind of on your radar. And then eventually we will talk about them all through I don't talk about the golden triangle much, but I do talk about the rule of thirds a whole lot when I'm working with my camera operators. So just stuff to kind of like start introducing you to. You know, we're just about to kick in October when we really start telling stories. So these things are nice visual keys.
This is created when you draw a diagonal line from corner to corner, and then lines from the other two corners intersecting at right angles, creating two balanced focal points. Points are a remarkably simple way to get your audience to focus on a particular area of your composition, especially in tandem with our next element, lines. Lines are the fundamental building blocks of composition. Vertical lines can suggest height and strength. Horizontal lines can suggest distance and calm. Diagonals can add an off-kiltered energy to a frame, while curved lines can make more graceful compositions. You can also use leading lines to pull the eye in a certain direction. Here, Christopher Nolan uses the lines of a hallway to draw our eye directly to the subject of the frame.
So I perfectly understand and kind of hit on it earlier that you can't really build a hallway the way Christopher Nolan's going to probably have that stage built exactly the way he has in his head if he can't find that location. Or in the other case, people make a pretty good living just being location scouts, traveling around looking for that perfect hallway for Christopher Nolan. I've had friends that will drive through like deserts just looking for the specific look that Tarantino has like on a wish list. And obviously the internet and things like that have made that industry a lot more accessible than it used to be. But locations and set building, all that stuff isn't really something that you guys have a lot of. But think about what you have access to. Start building like a mental library of this building has been shot every which way, I swear, but then every year a student does something just a little different that I hadn't seen before. So think about what you have access to, and particularly when you're at the college, I've seen students use the basement of Lockman Hall for like some horror-esque type suspense stuff that was just really great. They had a class down there one day and they just saw this hallway and got permission to go in and flip the lights on and off. Think about what you have access to make your projects more appealing. And like, I understand like Dayton, you know, you're in the dorms, so your project tends to take place around the dorms, and that's perfectly fine. But the more you can get out there and shoot in different locations or use a location differently, the stronger your projects will get to. So leading lines or lines in general, you know, what do you have access to, what's around? One in this building I particularly love is the blinds in the lobby. It's in a variable light, you can flip them up and down. You always have that really powerful sun kicking behind it. We've shot that window so many different ways. So think about that when you're getting inspired and trying to create stuff, and I'm giving you little prompts, and then you can really run with it. What do you have access to? What kind of stuff do they cover that you have yourself?
In Raging Bull, Scorsese uses the ropes and lens flares to point directly at Jake's opponent. Lines in composition create a sense of direction and mood, and when combined, they create an entirely separate element of composition: shapes. Shapes make up our visual reality, so it's no surprise that they are important in composition. Triangles, circles, squares all bring a kind of visual unity to the image. A clean geometric shape can add a tidy and satisfying feeling to a frame, as if everything is in order, whereas irregular or organic shapes can feel more natural or even chaotic. Shapes can also create frames within frames, giving the viewer a smaller area focused within an image. These secondary frames...
So I think immediately Aaron's shot with the trash cans, throwing the pills in the trash can, and how that had this almost like egg type shape to it. And it was just like it visually framed up that shot really nicely. So you guys are already doing some of these things in your work, and I'm seeing it. So now just kind of keep rolling with it. But yeah, that was one example just from this semester that is hit in our composition discussion.
Can evoke anything from claustrophobia to comfort, all depending on the shape, where it's placed, and the context of the scene. Shapes are used to build structures, but our next elements have more to do with sensations, textures and patterns. Like shapes, textures and patterns also help shape and inform how we read an image. Every object has a texture, smooth, patterned, or somewhere in between. Texture is often achieved through the collaboration between cinematographers and production designers. Even light can add different textures to an image. Texture can be used to have a subject pop from the background or blend in. Notice how busy the texture in this composition from Barry Lyndon is. Here, texture is used to create an ornate opulence. Consider the juxtaposition of textures between Wally and Eve and how it informs their personalities.
Directed. Classified.
Patterns also play an important role in composition. Power and control, harmony, insanity, all ideas that could be suggested with simple repetition. And breaking these patterns can be just as interesting. Consider how the pattern is broken in this shot and what it might suggest. Or how the carpet design in The Shining evokes a disorienting maze. Texture and pattern give the audience a more tangible connection to the imagery, and our next element adds dimension to the image. Space. Space is crucial in composition, and it can be split into two categories, positive and negative. Positive space is the area given to your subject, and negative space is the empty space around them. The relationship creates...
And obviously I cover a lot of our examples from cinema, from a filmic background. But when I worked on a marketing team, this was extremely important in composition. When we do, say, a magazine ad or a direct mailer or anything, a blog, website, when I would shoot, I'd have to make sure that I had space we'd have to plan this out. So they might have what's called a call to action, come here 20% off this particular product. Whatever it might be, you needed a space for maybe their logo, their graphics, so that their audience knew what they were trying to sell them. So negative space became very important, that I couldn't just frame it up exactly how I wanted to from an artistic stance. I had to consider it from a practical business stance on when our graphic designer needed to take my photos and apply all the graphics. That negative space was always a topic of conversation in our pre-production. So it might be something, and I think like Callie, because you're gonna do, you know, marketing, promotional videos, very common, you're probably gonna need space for your graphics, whether you're advertising a sale or an auction or whatever, you're gonna need that space. So when I shot for a ranch, we would do a poster every year for their auctions. And so you can't just have a big picture of a cow and not have any space to say when it is, you know, and where it's at and all that kind of stuff. So be thinking about that too.
Positive space is the area given to your subject, and negative space is the empty space around them. The relationship creates various ideas or moves. The larger the object in the frame, the more importance it has. From extreme wide shots that leave your subject isolated and vulnerable, to extreme close-ups that empower them. Other than the amount of negative space, the location of it also matters. Headroom is the amount of negative space above the subject's head, usually kept to a minimum. Lead room, or looking room, is the amount of negative space in front of the subject, which is usually much more than the amount behind them. But breaking these rules can be just as effective. Filling the frame is...
So that's kind of the funny thing about this being, you know, an artistic path, is that, you know, I was talking with Adam the other day about like definitives and like this exact thing, and it's like that teach you all the rules, and then you'll watch someone like the Coen brothers and they break them so well, and they do such a good job of that. So when they talk about how they want so much headspace here, which is very much how I am too. I really like to have my eyes on the top third of the screen. If we're breaking that into our rule of thirds, I really like to have my eyes up here. But to make it jarring or uncomfortable or put someone in an awkward situation, your team could decide to frame up and block your actor to, let's see, where was it? There. So by doing the opposite of what I like and what I'm comfortable with, makes this awkward. I don't know, I haven't seen the film, but instantly that makes me think that, like, you know, fish out of water, something's not right. They can't be comfortable being cramped into this space and all of this empty negative space. So there's a different, breaking that rule has tendencies to why that might be something that is visually effective for your audience. So understanding the rules and then understanding how to break them is really important. But for everything that, it's a very subjective world. So for everything that maybe I think is visually appealing, you may not. This is for debate pretty often. And within that, it's for you to kind of decide, you know, who do you like working with that has that same visual style, and you'll find that you'll work with those people a lot when you get on the same page there.
Is a technique that gives the subject most or all positive space, a form of sensory overload that can create a sense of chaos. The opposite can be equally effective. A simplified frame can be soothing, or even sad. These are all considerations of the 2D space of a frame, and in the next section, we'll add a third dimension to our compositions: depth. Film is a two-dimensional medium representing three-dimensional space.
So some of this is review, like stuff about the focus and things like that. In this case, you know, they're talking about depth film. You'll actually see examples that we showed during our focus project.
And the best way to accomplish this illusion is
Low
with
depth of field, racking focus to reveal a different character.
depth. We divide this space into three sections: the foreground, middle ground, and background. Each of these planes can be used to layer compositions that create hierarchies of meaning and relationships. Shallow focus isolates the subject from the other planes. If an object is in focus, our eyes will prioritize it, and changing focus during the shot draws our attention even further. In this shot, the pill is closer to the lens, but we don't focus on it until the camera does. Deep focus, referring to a large depth of field, allows for multiple layers of attention, as Citizen Kane pioneered. Here, all three.
You guys remember this shot? This is how iconic it was, where they're discussing essentially custody and rights for the child, and so you see the kid playing, you know, just so innocently outside, but a large depth of field all the way through, so their aperture had to be pretty high, probably at least an 11, in order to capture all of that sharply. Also meaning you're going to need some extra light. You're going to have to definitely add some light here because it's going to be closing that down. So we're starting to see repeated elements. I hit you guys with a whole lot of stuff, but throughout the program I'll try to keep bringing those things back to you over and over again so that they kind of settle in.
Planes are employed to visually create a hierarchy of importance and power. The mother asserts dominance in the foreground. The father flounders in the middle ground, while little Charlie plays innocently in the background. Depth is an illusion that turns a flat image into an entire world. The next element helps keep that world in order. Balance. No matter how you use space or depth, the rule of thumb is that the frame should be balanced. A subject positioned frame right, with nothing on the left, feels imbalanced. The same effect can happen with a foreground subject with nothing in the background. One technique to maintain balance is the rule of odds, which states that when shooting multiple subjects, it's more visually pleasing for the group to be an odd number.
Why is it when something happens, it is?
I mean, I've heard that before, but I really think that's kind of silly because it's really your story. And you have to think like, about like Jane and Silent Bob, you know, two always in the frame together almost every shot except for when they're shot reverse shot. So there's absolutely, again, exceptions to opinions or rules. But, you know, just things to consider.
Is always you three?
Believe me, Professor, I've been asking myself the same question for 6 years.
The golden ratio also utilizes balance, and there are a few ways to use it in composition. Related to the Fibonacci sequence, it is a ratio of 1 to 1.618, otherwise known as the number 5. If we draw a rectangle using the golden ratio and continue to divide it with the same proportions, it creates what's called the golden spiral. We can actually find this spiral in nature, and it has become a common tool in composition. Artists like Salvador Dali and photographers like Henri Cartier-Bresson have used the golden spiral to create a natural balance to their compositions. But you don't need something this complex to bring the golden ratio into your compositions. If we take the height of a film frame and draw a line using this ratio, we find an ideal location to place a subject's eyes, or the horizon. In this way, the applications are endless. Balance can also mean symmetry. Wes Anderson famously will often opt for symmetrical framing in lieu of the rule of thirds or the golden ratio.
Is that my bell?
Of course, there are times when you...
Wes Anderson's a great example of someone who basically just defined their own style and their own look. So instead of utilizing the rule of thirds the way I always kind of default to, I really always preferred the rule of thirds a lot. He likes to center things up, and that's just like you instantly know when it's a Wes Anderson film within a few minutes if you've watched one before, because they might be in different places. One might be animated, but they still all have a very distinct, centered up style. So basically, as a filmmaker, creating his own rules to his universe that he creates, and that's why the rules are what you want to make of them.
You want to make an audience uneasy with an unbalanced frame. Balance helps keep the image organized and stable. On the other hand, our next element can easily create instability. Angle. One of the more underutilized elements of composition is angle. Angle is perspective. It's about what we're seeing. It's about how we're seeing it.
This is one of the best ways that a low-budget filmmaker can really stand out from what would be just somebody grabbing a camera and put an actor in a scenario, is think about where you're putting that camera, why you're framing it up like that, why are you looking down, why are you looking up, how can you think of it in a more visually appealing way, whether it's a point of view of the character or if it's from a security cam perspective, you know, any of that stuff. The advanced production techniques students last semester decided to do a final project as one big group, which is totally cool. It just means that there's a lot going on. And they had so much coverage and perspective. Everyone had their own camera. So they were able to really think outside the box with their actors. And so they had one camera that played as a security camera. And they had another camera that was literally one of the characters. And they had cameras low and high, one on a gimbal, one on a tripod. So coverage and thinking about that, getting outside the box. And that was really cool because there was 13, 14 of them. And then they all had access to that footage and they could cut it their own way. But definitely be thinking about your angles. That can really help your project stand out. And again, Aaron, before you got in here, when we were talking shapes, I talked about your trash can shot, where you're dumping the pills in the trash can, and how that framed up that scene so nicely and created like a shape and something interesting like that. But also the angle is really cool, because you didn't just show someone tossing it away, you put the camera inside and really made that part of the story. So that's a great example of you guys being visual storytellers at an advanced capacity versus just having a camera and putting it on something. So that's kind of the news journalistic world. Gather the story, get that fire, get that parade, get that politician, and then on to the next thing. They don't usually have a lot of time to get really creative visually. So we try to teach you all of this, and then you can use those skills how you want to. So some of our students do go work in the news industry, but that doesn't mean they can't do a couple of short films in that process. Is there any thoughts or questions up to this point? I just want to show a few more examples to kind of keep you guys inspired. Then we'll talk about the shot list. And if you've already started that, that's perfectly fine. But I want to give you some time where I can shoot how I like to, the one that I want to start using and haven't used it yet, but I just want.
Most compositions will keep the camera parallel to the ground, but there are many opportunities to switch it up. A high angle makes the subject seem small and less powerful. A low angle does the opposite. An overhead angle.
We refer to this, I don't know if this video covers it, so we call this the God angle. This was extremely common, how propaganda films of World War II and previous to that Hitler would utilize he would always have his subject, he would be framed from a low angle to give him this like power concept, and it just works so well. His filmmaker, Leni Riefenstahl, who shot most of his propaganda films, she like coined this as, and it's been used ever since, that you see this low angle. Ironically, they have their Nazi killers for their example here. This low angle was popularized all the way back from war propaganda films, and it really does. It makes sure that character from that angle looks so powerful. So if you have like a politician or someone in charge of the scene, you likely a lower angle. If someone's losing an argument or something of that nature, that might be from a higher angle, that you look at them because you're giving that audience a perspective looking down. Does that make sense? How that works?
An overhead angle gives a more detached and objective perspective. Sometimes the moment calls for a Dutch angle, tilted to either side along the horizontal axis, like an unbalanced frame.
Dutch angles, basically you're just taking your camera and you're just tilting it off kilter. Really common to show when a scene is about to transition in a negative way, or a villain is introduced, or in this case, I believe this is from Joker, showing him getting attacked. They tilted that camera on its axis to show the audience that things are unbalanced, things are off, things don't quite match up. And it's really common to have that when your story is taking a negative direction. Conflict is overcoming your hero. So you'll often see these in film. I personally am not a big fan of using Dutch angles too often, but it's just something else that you should have in your bag if you want to really convey a story.
The moment calls for a Dutch angle, tilted to either side along the horizontal axis. Like an unbalanced frame, this strategy can make an audience feel on edge, or give a shot the kinetic energy. For a complete guide to camera angles, check out episode 3 of this series, linked below. Any of these camera angles can accent or enhance some of the compositional techniques we've already covered, including our final element, colour and tone. The use of colour in a frame can also help direct a viewer's eye. Consider what various colour schemes.
So you guys can't control a whole lot of the costuming and set design at this particular juncture, but you can definitely think about the tone that you have with your color. Is it a warm film? Is it black and white? Is it cool sci-fi feel? Rom-coms tend to be warm. In this case, Life of Pi, this scene is very, very warm. So you can control tone with your cameras. In camera, you can obviously do it in post-production. Many of you are in post 2 and post 1 right now. And so you're seeing that your NLEs can do that. Think about that tonality that you're conveying. I know we're talking about framing and telling a story, what's in the frame and what size on this project more than anything. But when I'm considering my shot list, I might actually put in there what I think the white balance might need to be, or what I want that feel to be. Especially if I'm working with multiple people on that set, and I'm not the only one shooting. I'm going to convey my visual goals to the entire team. So like when I was in Atlanta last year, our visual team was a team of 5. So our mood board and our shot list was really important to keep us all on the same page with our team, so we could communicate with the director and the actors about what we were trying to do. So yeah, you can't, and they're going to talk a little bit about costuming and the boat being painted on the inside. Things to consider for when you do have more time and more of a budget or more control over your set. But yeah, what you can do right now, tone for sure.
Is bring to the composition. Monochromatic, analogous, complementary, or triadic colour schemes all have great influence over how we read an image. Colour can even overrule other methods of composition. In this shot from In the Mood for Love, the background has a busy texture that normally would draw our attention. But Wong Kar-wai uses the juxtaposition of the bright green of Mrs. Chan's dress with the red background to make her the undeniable subject of the frame. Check the description for a link to download our ebook.
Okay, so hopefully that gave you a little bit of inspiration, some ideas of maybe if you're sitting there with kind of I guess like a visual block and you're not quite sure what you want. Maybe you had an idea but you didn't know how you wanted to frame it up or something. I think this video does a really good job of just conveying a lot of cool concepts that maybe you hadn't thought about. I'm going to go ahead and switch over a little bit. Is there any questions about what we were talking about with that? Again, don't stress about, I'm not going to quiz you on rule of third and all those things. That's not really the goal there. It's more to hit you with some of that terminology so you start thinking about it and have it introduced to you. But we're going to be discussing that stuff all throughout. So, and when we watch your films next week, we'll talk about what worked and what you were going for and how maybe we could try it differently. And that's the whole point, is we're growing together as a team, and you guys are going to get more and more advanced. Okay, so if you're wanting to use this one, which again, there's a bunch of free ones here as well that are nice and basic. I use ShotList personally on all sorts of projects, not just filmmaking. So in the media world, when you're you might even have lists for like audio recordings, things like that, if you're doing Foley. So listing out what you need, what you're going for in that particular project, and being able to check it off is a great feeling as a producer, knowing that I got what the client, or I got what the director, or I got what I needed to tell that story. Nothing's worse than spending a 16-hour day or like a 70-hour week shooting and just going, man, I hope we got everything. Like, don't do that to yourself. This is way too easy, and everybody has kind of their own style and how they want to develop that depending on your team. For me, whatever you turn in, I just want it to be consistent. So there's many different ways to do this, but you don't have to do it any one in particular way. So if you're going to call a shot a cowboy instead of like a medium wide, just make sure you do that throughout. Just make sure you're calling the cowboy angle all the way through, so that way you don't confuse whoever might be on your team. But they do. They have several examples. As the very, very basic one, and I used to use this type of shot list when I did weddings. I just thought it was great. I would sit down with the bride and groom way in advance to make sure that we were on the same page. And I would have something as basic as this, especially if I didn't know them, if I'd never met them before. If they say groom with Uncle Jack, I don't know who that is. So that's why I would need to have it detailed so that I could go through and my assistant or myself or a partner on that project could go up to someone and be like, hey, who's Uncle Jack? We need to check this off the list. And then I would leave those chaotic days. I had one wedding because of travel as well. It was an 18-hour day. And driving back to Kansas, my partner and I, we got tons of material, but we're sitting there like sleep deprived on the highway, just eating power bars going, did we get that shot? I think we got that shot. Like, you don't want to do that to yourself when you really do have time to sit this down. This saves you a ton of issues when it comes down to your expectations with clients and producers that we checked off the list. So if I had my director in Atlanta and they had a list but they didn't include something, but the list was checked off, that's not going to fall back on you because you have documentation to show, hey, we didn't get that one included in our pre-production, so you can't blame the director of photography and their team because it wasn't on the list. We checked off our list. So it helps with making everybody more accountable and getting everything together. Because it's not uncommon to have somebody change something in the moment. And if it's not on the shot list, then that gives you a little bit of backing. So I was driving to do kind of a biographical story on this small business. And on our way to the drive, the owner like bogarted the script and changed it all up on our way there. So that changes the expectations, that changes the dynamic when you show up. Because what we had agreed upon months in advance for this particular project, and we're coming with our audio and our cam op, and we had a team of like 4 or 5, small team, but you can't just like hand us a new script right when we walk in the door and hold us accountable for something not going exactly right. That's not logical. So things like pre-production documents like shot lists really help you to have expectations covered. It'll make your client feel more comfortable, it'll make you feel more comfortable. So I'm implementing this in this assignment 3 because these are things that you'll utilize throughout your whole career in some capacity or another. Whether it's this basic or as complex as the one that I'm putting together right now. So let me pull, I'll just show you a couple here. Dave, did you use this or did you find one yet? No? Okay. And this gives you, because I had an instance where the bride provided me with a 200 item shot list. One of the things, so I read it because I didn't want to just take that and go, cool, we'll get it. One of the things on there was like bride and sister crying on a bench. What if you don't cry? I was like, I can't sign off on this unless, are you going to cry? Can you cry on command? Like, make sure, this is your expectations and this is your negotiating before you ever want to like accept a project. These kinds of conversations will help you know if you're about to get into a bad assignment or if you're on the same page. And even after, like I worked with some clients for the last several years, when we just update these, we might just, if we go back again, we got this new piece of machinery that we want to cover, but same kind of shot list, but with this piece too. That's really common, and it's good to save these over the years. I always try to save all my documentation from any project, whether it's a script version 2 of 5 or anything. I try to save all of it. I'm a bit of a hoarder when it comes to my media documentation. This one's a little more detailed. You can't see it great, but it says scene, shot, type, MS, medium shot. That's how I like to do that, MS, WS, wide shot. And again, I included an example down here that can kind of give you a guide. I never use VWS, very wide shot. I don't. I might have like a master shot. I might have aerial included, but I never use VW. So again, this is just stuff that you can utilize that'll help you. I just want you to be consistent throughout so that if you're working on a team, because everybody does it differently. So the 3 projects I'm in pre-production on right now all have a different template for their shots. And then they have a spot to check off if it's done, or maybe even say, we got it, but it was really, really bright. Or maybe we got this shot, but there was a lot of traffic, so there was noise. You might leave a little note for yourself in the editor in those particular settings. Because this may not be in this particular setting, you guys are all your own editors, but a lot of the projects I do, I'll shoot but not edit. So this documentation can go in with the media so they can see what we did. And it's not always a scenario where your editor is on location with you, especially our main editor lives in Texas, so he hasn't been on set with me since 2019. I like this one. It gives a little more than I need for most stuff, but it's nice. Shot name, scene number, location, shot type, shot angles, where you say maybe low angle, god angle, high angle, movement. Maybe there's no movement, so you can say NA for not applicable, or you could say sticks, like tripod, then you know you're not moving, but maybe you are. Maybe you're doing like a pan with your tripod instead. Description of action, characters, which this one would work even if I was doing a wedding. My characters could be bride and groom, best man, flower girl. So these things work nice. Lighting notes, because typically this is for a visual assignment, but we've made lists for audio before too. Isn't anybody like one more than the other? Is any of them standing out? Does anybody have a different one that they're liking? No? Yes? No? This looks like a bride wedding one. Shoes and accessories, banquet photo. Groom getting ready with the groom's food. Pretty typical. Okay, so let's pull up the one that I recently found. I think it was made by someone here. But you can take this, make a copy of it, and then you can go in and you can actually, I like this one too because it's digital. So camera 1, camera 2, you can select. Maybe you have a 2-camera shoot. In Atlanta, we had 2 cameras running the entire project. So I might have for Jordan's camera, I might put him on, say, at 24 and I'm going wide, which is something I did a lot. And then with Isaac, if he's camera 2, I often had him on a tighter lens, a little closer in, which would have usually been a 50 or an 85. And that helps me as director of photography. I never touched the camera, but this was like everything that I was in charge of on this project because I wasn't director. I was just director of photography, so I had a team to handle this stuff. I like that you can click off that it's completed as you go through. The great thing about a Google Doc like this, and this is in slides, I believe, is I can share this with my whole team. And so I can be on my tablet checking these things off, and hopefully, I think I'm gonna try and implement it maybe this Saturday on this project, but I can give you more of an update if that was helpful or not. So then you have your various scenes, whatever you're trying to shoot. We're shooting our entire project this weekend, so we're gonna have all the scenes covered in one day. I don't know that I'll use setup or shot necessarily, but maybe scene and complete. I don't think I'll use reference. I might change that to like description, or delete this right here and give more space for description. The other thing that's cool about slides is you can really edit this down. And then it keeps going. And I love that it has an audio option because I'm executive producer on this project. I'm not director of photography. I'm not the director. But as producer, I am worried about making sure they get audio and visual. So this one's going to work great for me. And I like that best take. So if we did 5 takes, and I think 4 was really the one that nailed it, that's now enough for the editor. So this is going to be a really good shot list for me in the future, with a little tweaking, I think, but nothing too much. Now they even have more. You can have your equipment. Really important to list out your equipment, especially in the case of what we did in Atlanta. We had equipment coming from things that my company provided, my company rented, then we rented from another company, and then we also had a gaffer that came with his own gear. And he was smart and had all of his stuff taped with like, it was like bright yellow tape. So everything with a bright yellow piece on it we knew was his. And then the rest of it we had detailed out in these lists from pre-production that was taking place months before we ever went to the airport. Scenes, I probably won't use this one much, but it's there. I don't know, maybe setups, maybe I call this just like locations. I could see because a location list, because scouting is important, and then cast members. Nice for everyone to keep in touch. So I probably wouldn't call this cast, I'd probably just call this everybody, like the whole team crew, because then you can list I'll probably have their role and contact number and then name, and email. Phone numbers really aren't the best way to try and get in touch with all these people at once. I would much prefer having an email list for a team that's 13 potential people or 11. So it starts on 2. Any questions about this? I want to give you guys the rest of the day to pull up a template, update one. If you've already done one, then great. But I want to give you the rest of the time to either be in the lab, shoot something, or work on your shot list. Now, I haven't mentioned anything about storyboarding. You absolutely can storyboard. Many people do like to storyboard. I don't. I never use storyboards. I really don't prefer them. I do like mood boards. I do like to have a visual reference. I like to have test shots. But typically, if I have a shot list, maybe I'll have references attached to it. But I don't use storyboarding myself. When we do, I just use stick figures just so you can see exactly what's happening. But mainly the description underneath that terrible illustration line is what I go off of. Because that's where I'll say movement or who was in the scene, type of lens maybe. I feel like a shot list is way more detailed and much more helpful than what I find anything that I'm getting from a storyboard. Storyboarding is really great if you're trying to get your vision out to a team and you're not going to shoot it. So I have a friend who's a phenomenal writer, but not a photographer. He doesn't shoot anything, but he does edit. But when he likes to do kind of like a really rough storyboard with some of his scripts, just so he can kind of convey that vision out, because he's going to inevitably work with some other cinematographer or camera operator. Okay, so thoughts, questions? Does anybody think they'll use this one, or are you going to go for one of the more standard? Yeah, Dayton.
So like those like standard ones that you can download. Like how do we like actually like edit those?
It depends on which one you get. So what I've done with ones like this is I would actually just, because it's big enough, I would actually just use a pen and just write that in. Like I would sit down in a meeting with like the client
like you
and
actually print
just
it?
sit and write it down sometime. And that's the other thing is I don't know because whether you're on the Dell or, oh, that's going to make you put in your email probably. We're going to do that. Oh, here it is. This one's letting me on this really old Mac type in.
Oh, sweet.
So yeah, it just depends. But like this Mac's really out of date. So hopefully if you're using a Dell or a Mac in there, you'll just be able to put it in Word or something.
Okay.
A lot of times it's a Word document, is what I've noticed.
I'm pretty sure we get like a free download of Microsoft Word.
You should, yeah, for being a student. Zoe, do you know about that?
What was the question?
The Microsoft Office, do they get to download that for themselves as students?
Maybe.
No.
I think you maybe can.
Like,
Thought you.
It's just
I'm like
true.
99% sure you
You can
can.
download 365.
I think you just need to put your.
Yeah, I thought you'd get like
school
something
laptop.
because you're students.
Yeah,
I think so.
I think you put your school email.
And we do have Microsoft Word on those computers. That was something that we had to put in a help ticket for. So yeah, take the rest of the time, figure out which one you like, and start updating that. And then you'll turn that in as well. So when you're showing next Thursday, you have a week still. When you show next Thursday, you can also have your shot list up so you can talk about how you thought that was going to go in pre-production and how it ended up. So I like to be able to do that comparison. And you guys will be doing that with Joey. I'll be presenting. Next week I'm in Manhattan, then Topeka, then Wichita, so probably won't see me much next week. Pretty busy week.